You? Sorry, I had some problem with placing my computer.
Okay.
I don't know if it's okay now.
But
I can't see myself.
We're all here now. So let me already kick off. Welcome everybody. So this is a series of roundtables organized together by Copenhagen. And you see Toraj with his very nice background of Copenhagen School of Infrastructure. He's the director and a professor there. You will get to know him in a minute. I'm here today as the host, Florence School of Regulation. And so when we had to organize these roundtables together, we were looking at the map of Europe. Copenhagen is a very nice place. Florence is an equally nice place. So where to organize? And then we decided Zoom. I don't know if you know Zoom, but it's some very beautiful place in between Copenhagen and Florence where we are currently located. And I'm very happy to have all of you here. And you might wonder why we are co-organizing these roundtables. Well, maybe not all of you were at the last infrastructure forum organized by European Commission and all the stakeholders, but very nicely we have been invited in the conclusions of that forum last year to follow up with an academic initiative and to bring together experts and to draft a paper and our view on what more can we do in Europe on innovation, and specifically on uptake of innovative technologies by TSOs and DSOs. And that's why we prepared for you 2 roundtables. So today is the first one. If you like the one of today, you can join the one of tomorrow, because tomorrow we continue the discussion. Today is more about incentives and how we organize innovation in Europe for networks. Tomorrow is more specifically on regulatory experimentation, but because besides funding and besides the ecology of innovation we will discuss today, tomorrow you will see that sometimes innovation also requires us to give some exceptions to the rules to make it possible to do innovation. And that's how we will continue the discussion tomorrow. Today, only to remind you that we already started to engage by drafting a paper. It's just a draft. So of course, we will use the debate today to improve this draft. And then at some point, we will also publish it and bring it to the next Copenhagen Forum. Some of you already started to engage with us by giving comments on the paper, by voting online at this poll we had organized. And today is your opportunity to continue that engagement. The only thing left for me to do is to introduce the panelists. So you already know why Toraj and me are here, but let me also introduce the others. So first you have Sinja. Of course, we're talking about network companies, so good to have one of these companies on board. And what is nice about Energinet is that they're both active in gas and electricity. So I'm very happy to have Sinja here to give her the company view. Then you have Ricardo and Benoit. They are both very active already for a long time in the infrastructure task force, jointly organized by ACER and CER. So that's why they are here. But as you can see, they also represent the country. So Ricardo can bring us some more from the Italian experience and Benoit from the French experience. Then we will also have Mark. Mark will be joining us in a minute. He's from European Commission and he's doing a lot on bridging the regulatory discussion on innovation with the R&D discussion, which are sometimes 2 communities that of course need to be coordinated. And I'm very happy to have him on board also in this debate. So how we will do the debate is we have 3 topics prepared. And on each of these topics, there will be a short introduction by Toraj. Then we will do a poll to ask all of you, the participants, for your view, and that will then be used to kick off the discussion with the panelists. If there is room, you know, we will still have a Q&A at the end, but don't hesitate to put questions in the chat box, in the Q&A box during discussion. If we have an opportunity, we can reply by typing, or I can try to pick up some of these questions during the debate. So please, Toraj, introduce us to the first topic.
Thank you very much, Leo. I would like to thank our distinguished panelists and welcome all our visitors and guests listening in. For the benefit of time, I will be brief, as brief as I can. The background to this is that until only a short while ago, we were very concerned about avoiding the tipping point of a global temperature rise curve. And then just a few months later, we are finding ourselves concerned with passing the virus spread tipping point. So these two, the coincidence of these two is very significant for the energy industry. One thing we can be sure is that between now and 2050, there will be other crises. There will be, next time will be probably something else. It could be economic crisis, it would be something else, but there will be events between now and 2050 where we are trying to decarbonize our economies and energy sector during this period. And then the other point I'd like to raise is that the technologies and the solutions we have at the moment at hand, they will only take us this far. For 2050, we need many different kind of technologies and practical solutions to help us. And then I would like to ask to recall that we should remember the resilience of the internet and the energy industry with the swift temporal and spatial changes in consumption that they actually helped us manage the current crisis that we are in. So that takes us to where we are at the moment. So when there is a major economic crisis and social crisis, what do we do with the green energy and green transition debate? Are we going to say that we will put everything on hold until a later point because it's a very bad time, or we want to look for possibilities and look for the synergies? So the question is there a potential or a conflict that we are observing at the moment? Can I have the previous slide back, please? The blue one. If you look at the R&D and innovation spending in the liberalized energy sectors, if you're looking for energy, you don't have to look on the left-hand side. You need to look at the right-hand side, and it is somewhere sort of in the middle. That gives us an idea of the amount of R&D spending and among the 1,000 largest firms. And we have to remember, energy is arguably the largest industry in the world. But in terms of R&D spending in the private sector, in the market sort of part of the energy, there is so little energy spending. And we need to understand what's happening in this space. Some of it has to do with economic properties of the industry, and there are other reasons for it. Next slide, please. So that was for the private sector spending, but the government spending is also very low by any measure. When you look at it, again, when we think about the importance and the size of this industry, we are looking at very, very minor sort of amounts of spending. And we also have to remember that governments are involved in R&D spending because of market failure. It's a classic case of market failure, actually, R&D. And so that was the private sector, and this is the government, and this is the public sector. So what do we do going forward?
Thank you, Torash. And
Thank you.
I realized I didn't introduce Joe. I was confused with the videos because I cannot get all the videos on one screen. I'm very sorry, Joe. So of course, everybody knows that when you talk about giving innovative incentives, regulatory incentives for innovation, you think of Ofgem, right? Joe is the former chief economist of Ofgem, so we're very happy to have him here, and I will share their experiences because they have a long track record of trying to introduce new type of incentive schemes for innovation. Thank you, Torash. You introduced the first topic. You already gave the background that spending on innovation in energy is not that large. And then we are in a new context. So there will be more spending done, but should that spending go to energy and should it go to infrastructure? So this is the first poll we would like all participants to answer to. So do you see the current context as an opportunity or not? So either you say yes to this question and you think some of that recovery money can go to networks and innovation in networks, or you say no, we actually have other priorities in energy where the funding could be used more usefully, or no, because there are other priorities in the economy, such as healthcare. So I'm very curious to know what you think of that. Okay. Can we share the polling results? Okay, so a lot of the people here are saying yes, but there is some doubt. So I'm very curious to know what my panelists think. Who would like to come in first on this one? Joe, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for the invitation. As Leo said, I'm former chief economist at Ofgem, the British regulator. I do think I answered yes quite strongly to this. I think that if we are looking towards a green recovery after what might be about the sharpest recession since records began in many countries, then investing in networks and investing in research for the future is absolutely vital. I do think that certainly in the UK, and to the extent I'm aware in other jurisdictions too, there has been quite a long-term trend, as Touraj was identifying, of perhaps underinvestment in some of the long-term requirements, and particularly in research and development and innovation in the network sector. And so putting that right, I think, is absolutely crucial. And I think for me, a bunch of factors align quite closely. One is decarbonisation. 2 is achieving a green recovery and a rapid recovery post-coronavirus. And 3 is, on a more narrow basis, getting energy networks prepared and more resilient for using new technologies and for helping consumers in the next 20, 30 years.
Sinja, I see you agreeing with that. Would you like to elaborate?
Yes, indeed, I do agree. And I think when I pressed yes on this, this is in the sense of the broader understanding of energy networks. I think that what we really need here is to have innovation, research and development also around the hardcore technology parts of the network. I think we indeed need the business innovation around this as well. And I think this is a prerequisite for even having the low carbon generation and low carbon future. So to have a better innovation, a better understanding on how to utilize our networks in the broad sense, also around flexibility, which I think is very vital for TSOs as well as DSOs in the future. We have to have incentives that recognize that need also in the future.
Benoit, please.
Yeah, thank you, Leo. Just to talk a little bit about regulation, actually. So just to say that on ACER and CR sides, we have published a Bridge Beyond 2025 paper, where our ambition is to contribute to the ongoing debate on decarbonization. And regarding innovation, then I think we have repeated that regulation is there to really support innovation towards the decarbonized sector. And we raised this issue of the role of networks in this overall context. The general view is on technological improvements. The market remains something to stimulate, and innovation can come from different sources. But going beyond this point, we have to address networks in the overall context and say, I see innovation regarding networks of 2 different natures. The first thing is we have innovation within network management and on networks themselves, and the role of networks in the investment climate in general, and being, let's say, welcoming new initiatives by, for example, market players and energy producers and so on. So I think it's important to have these 2 elements in mind. Regulation, of course, serves innovation by TSOs and DSOs. I mean, there are different frameworks, and can be back to this on the in the second poll, and also to give some guarantees that if there are good innovations that may require to be connected to the networks, then the overall system will be welcoming these initiatives.
Okay, please, Ricardo.
Good morning to all. I'm Riccardo Vailati from the Italian regulator. I have to say I was a bit surprised by the result of the poll, because I'm in Italy, maybe because I'm in Lombardy, which is the center of the coronavirus outbreak. Maybe because I'm in between Milan and Bergamo, which were the center of the center of the center of the coronavirus outbreak. I would have expected more focus on the last regarding healthcare and more attention to that. However, I believe that precisely this need to recover in general other sectors calls for an even stronger role of let me call alternative technology or advanced technology, which are technologies which were innovative a few years ago, and now we have to strive via regulation and via TSO engagement as well to put in place in the networks, because these are the solutions which will allow to either deliver the same at less cost or deliver more at the same cost. And this is really crucial for innovation, and it is, I would say, witnessed by the fact that within the ACER and CR frameworks, which Benoit mentioned before, we are also starting now, we're starting in 2020, various stream of activities regarding innovation. And I would pick one of the points raised in the webinar chat. Indeed, we are following up as regulators to the Copenhagen Infrastructure Forum last year. We are evaluating the current status of innovation, and it will be presented at the next forum, maybe on Zoom, as someone suggests, or in a physical place. We are starting working also on the smart grid indicator, which is something coming from the Electricity Clean Energy Package Directive. And of course, we are also focusing on the possible revision of the regulation, which is expected to come into the discussion soon. So I think that our increased effort on, let's call it either innovation or put in place of best solution is, even in a pandemic crisis as today, to get more out of the money we all invest in the networks. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. I'll come back to you, Joe. Let me first also call in Mark to make a comment on this.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Leo, and thank Copenhagen and France for organizing this panel debate, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's a very interesting and timely discussion. So on this first question, of course, you know, there are other priorities, and healthcare is a very high priority, but we are talking about also about the recovery after the crisis, and in Europe we're discussing a lot how we can also make sure that with the support that we give to many companies that are in trouble, use that support also to make sure that puts them on a direction that is sustainable and helps meeting the climate objectives. I think that's a very kind of evident and logic point, and the difficulty will obviously be in the making that operational. Now, concerning the figures on investments in R&I, these are the ones that Toha showed before. They are very much also confirmed by what we see as part of the Energy Union governance, where we ask all member states to tell us how much they actually invest in R&I, and basically the trend is not very good, as maybe it goes up a little bit, but it really went down over the last 10 years, and it is by no means sufficient to meet the ambition that we have as Europe in being climate neutral. We need to invest a lot more in R&I. So it's really important that we keep making this point, and the public support needs to increase, but of course also the private investments in research and innovation needs to increase. And these are things that are very high on our agenda in the Commission, and on which we want to engage with the dialogue with member states and the private sector to see what how we can do something about this. Then on the network specific, I think it's interesting. It's an interesting question, because probably the energy networks are not the most affected by the crisis. People still consume electricity, and normally they still pay their bills. they still pay for the network. So a question is also how much can they be part of the recovery, because they're probably not the first sectors that are addressed when it comes to supporting the economy to come out of this crisis. But it is obvious that the networks have a crucial role to play in the, let's say, in the sustainable future that we all envisage, and that if we don't get the networks organized well, then all this renewable integration will be much more costly. So trying to see the link between those, I think, is key also in the recovery measures, that we make sure that the networks also are able to keep up with all the other investments, and that requires both to look at the regulatory part as well as the financing and the support part, like the programs like Horizon 2020 or national programs. So I think these are like important points to make on this question, I think it's important that we look at it both, like you did in the paper, from the regulatory point of view as well as from the funding point of view, because the regulation obviously have a big impact on how networks can invest in innovative things, and making the link between the two, I think, is a key issue that we really need to work on hard in Europe to make that link and interaction better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Joe, just a short reaction.
Yeah, so I think Mark's probably said it to some extent, that I do disagree a bit with the premise of the question, really. I would certainly answer yes, of course, we need to be investing more in healthcare. Yes, of course, we also need to be investing more in low carbon generation. I think Mark's point is absolutely right, though, that actually, if we are investing more, as I hope we will, in low carbon generation, we need network investment as well to integrate that in a sensible way, and hopefully in as low cost as possible way, because there are various high cost ways of integrating both low carbon generation and low carbon sources of demand, like electric vehicles and electric heat pumps and the like. There are also lots more low cost ways of doing that if we do develop a much more flexible energy network.
Thank you, Joe. And I think with these comments started by Ricardo and followed up with Joe and Mark, you're basically also saying what Jochen and others in the chat box are writing. These are not exclusive alternatives, right? But okay, it was the first question. It was to warm us up, and I think we're all ready now to get into a more technical discussion. So please, Touraj, tell us technically from a regulatory point of view, what options do we have? You still have to unmute, Touraj.
Okay, well, I'm not a regulator, so I hope I will be forgiven by our regulator colleagues. But if to the extent that we decide, no matter how much we need innovation and R&D in the networks, there are a few instruments that are at our disposal. Or maybe we need to develop the new ones. So from left to right, we can mention, for example, we can have a regulatory asset-based approach to this. So we can say, as we often say, because research and development is an investment. So if it's an investment, then it should be treated like other assets and be part of the regulatory asset base of the companies. Or we can take another approach and say, well, no, we can use a weighted average cost of capital based approach to this, and reward innovative activities and spending at a higher rate, incentivize them that way. Or we can just say, no, it's not a capital expenditure R&D, it could be just a cost pass through for the companies. So the companies will spend what they are allowed, and then we pass it to the ratepayers, essentially. And then among this, we can think about sort of hybrid solutions, such as competing for funding, as we some years ago often started the concept of competition for funding, low carbon network funds. Joe is here. I will not say more on that while he's here, at the risk of being wrong. But then the whole debate is moving on at the same time. The first 20 20 or 25 years after the liberalization, regulation of network was all about efficiency and cost cutting and cost efficiency. But now we are expecting other performances and other outputs from these networks. So we are probably at the beginning of a sort of move towards output-based kind of regulation, where the cost cutting doesn't matter very much. And instead of looking backwards to cut costs, we are increasingly looking forward, and we look at the needs and the achievements that we need along the way, and our expectations from the networks. And if we agree on the sort of the need for a change in regulatory mode to output-based regulation, then we can say, well, let the chase begin, because there is a lot of work in that space to be done. So on that note, I stop talking.
Thank you, Touraj. So you introduced to us a wide range of possibilities, and again, they might be used in combination, but just to feel the temperature in the group, if we present them as options to you, which one is your favorite? So do you think incentive schemes are best if they are more input oriented, and that can come in different shapes, as Touraj just illustrated? Is it more output oriented, or should we put more emphasis on these, let's call them competitive schemes? And some of them have been organized nationally, but also Mark is organizing these kind of tenders at European level. So, dear participants, here is your opportunity to vote for your favorite. There you go. And from now on, please remember that Rio is in the UK. Let's see if we can get the results. By the way, I see that not only many people registered, also a massive amount of people showed up today, which is great. Okay, quite spread in terms of no clear favorite. So, dear panelists, do you have a clear favorite among these options? Sinje, you're very close, no? Which
Yes.
are the ones you're getting right now?
Well, I went for the first one, and mainly it's because in Guinea we have a cost pass through. But I think what is important also to add to that is one thing is how this is covered cost-wise. But I think how is it incentivized, and maybe we're a little bit back to the previous discussion, because if you look into the mandates, I suppose the cost that we can spend is related to the mandate. And I think we have to look broader on our mandate for innovation, at least when it comes to transmission system operator. I see three kind of roads towards accelerating the innovation that we see today. One is obviously having innovation ourselves. I think we have a track record for that. Another thing is actually to accelerate the innovation around us. And I think here data is of vital importance. And I'm not sure that all TSOs and DSOs have the proper mandate to actually give access to data and set data free in order to promote innovation also around networks. So I think it's an important discussion to also look at the mandates for innovating and the mandate for promoting innovation around us. And then the third point, which I have here, is that to innovate, we also have to look into strategic partnerships. And how do we, as a governmental organization or a monopoly, work very closely on maybe strategic partnerships with more commercial partners? And I think that is something that also has to be worked in to our initial mandate for innovation.
Thank you, Sinje. So it's also nice that you opened the discussion on mandates, because it would be nice to know from our three regulators on the panel to what extent you actually have a mandate to really focus on innovation and making sure TSOs and DSOs are innovating. Benoit, I see you moving.
Yes,
you want to kickstart?
Yeah, sure. No, this question of the mandate is of course absolutely crucial, because regulation is there to serve some clear objectives, and for sure the question of innovation goes well, is something which has to be addressed in a broad manner, and TSOs and DSOs are part of a system. And the key question is, what is the kind of innovation we want to promote? And when we talk about innovation, incentives, the first thing is, what are we really talking about? I think that being an economist, I have this inclination to talk about incentives as being the main reason for acting. But actually, incentives, I must confess, are only part of the reason for developing some various strategies. So the first thing is to clarify what we talk about. I think that in terms of regulation here, to me, the mixed answers are, well, reflect reality at some point. We need to combine different tools. We have to provide some comfort to investors on the one hand, because we do not know from the beginning what the results of innovation will be. So there should be some guarantees that some costs will be covered. And at the same time, we need to also follow the developments and ensure that the money is spent in an appropriate way. So it's quite normal that we have a combination of tools, and I say it's precisely the practice that we have in France, and I think that we started some years ago developing some strategies on smart grids. Now it's been enlarged to many other aspects, inclusion of electric vehicles, development of biogas, and in all cases, we try to figure out what is the role of operators, what kind of comfort they can bring to the various stakeholders, and what is the kind of innovation they have to carry out in their activities, I'd say. And I will stop talking here to give the floor to my
Thank you, Benoit. And I would like to also hear from Ricardo. Joe, I guess you also have experience with all three, but maybe there is a trend you see that you started maybe using one more than the other, and depending on experience evolve. So that would also be good if you could highlight that. Joe, maybe you can come in.
Sure, yeah. So I think the UK experience is one of moving through some of these tools. So I do think one of the reasons, as Benoit has pointed to, that perhaps we've got a spread of votes is because different tools are going to be appropriate in different circumstances. But I think in the UK experience was essentially that both the input and the output oriented schemes in themselves weren't producing the type of strategic innovation that we were looking for. And that's why, I think that's one of the big advantages of a competitive scheme, which can be more focused on particular types of innovation. We're looking at retooling in terms of making it much more focused on basically supporting a net zero economy. So things like perhaps a transition to hydrogen on the gas side, and also about integrating lots more demand in a flexible way on the electricity side. So I do think there is a need for those kinds of competitive schemes that go beyond the basics of the input and output oriented schemes. Whilst I've got the floor, if I could just give a big thumbs up to Sinead's point about data. I think Energinet has done fantastic work with data. I think all of us, certainly very much, including Ofgem and the UK system operators, can learn a lot from what's been going on there, because I think the types of innovation we're looking for are obviously very data intensive, and we as regulators need to make sure that that data is available in a suitably anonymized way so that people can bring in new developments.
Thank you, Joe. Ricardo.
Then it's up to me, and I also try, before going from the left to the right of the picture before, I also try to take into account a couple of comments in the chat and question and answers. In the slides, it was written to stimulate innovation in the previous one, and now it's written to enable innovation. And I believe these are two different things, and it's spotted also by some attendees in the chat. We have, it would be very useful to distinguish R&D, and there was a comment that the R&D metric is maybe not really the perfect metric, and what is, for instance, pilot project, which are, let's call it, at the beginning of the chain of development and deployment, and what is putting in place non-traditional solutions, which is deployment, real rollout in our networks. Depending on what we are discussing, the regulatory tools are likely to be different. The Italian case, for instance, we started, I would say, from the real left side of the previous picture. Given that we have a hybrid scheme with the difference between CapEx treatment and OpEx treatment, we are allowed to capitalize as much as possible research and innovative expenditures. This was not enough, probably, and the Italian regulator started, I would say, in 2010 to promote pilot projects. We have quite a long experience in promoting pilot projects via the second column of the table, which is extra work schemes. This has been, I would say, amended over time. It has been later phased out, but the most important amendment is that, for instance, for transmission-based development of storage, we included a condition, an output-based condition to allow the extra work. So it was already a bit of a transition from the input-based, work-based, to the output-based. And output-based is in practice our current way of, our current approach. Besides and this is mostly focused on real implementation in the networks of new solutions. For instance, years and years ago, we started with the classical output-based promoting reliability of transmission and distribution networks. And we observed a massive automation, especially in medium voltage networks. It was really a change in our networks promoted by an output-based scheme. Regarding transmission, the latest activity, I think 2 years ago, we introduced a scheme that promotes transfer capacity between in the network, both between bidding zones and inside bidding zones. And we recently amended this regulatory mechanism to even increase the reward if the cost for increasing capacity is lower. So our current focus is really on outputs-based solutions, probably because our objective is to really have implementation in the networks after having developed pilot projects and in the past years. Thank you.
Thank you, Riccardo. Mark, I would also like to hear your view, especially because you connect with this competitive scheme where Joe says that could be used for more strategic investments. So I would like to know if you think the same.
Yes, definitely. I mean, maybe three short comments. One is that in the clean energy package, we also addressed in particular this first point in the sense of how network regulation or net rewards for investments were very much capital based. And we there also asked that regulators and network operators look at the cost of, let's say, services to make a market function better, and like for flexibility to help grid management, that those can also be included in the asset base on which the tariffs are calculated. So I think that's an important point, which is of course a point of principle then, and how that is translated into national network rules or so is another challenge that is for the regulators. But I think this was an important point of principle that was agreed with all the member states that needs to happen indeed. The second thing, if you look at your column, it was I just thought of a discussion we had yesterday on energy communities and how they are being regulated, and where of course the regulators are also looking into how do we actually deal with this, where the argument from many of the projects that we've been supporting was also that there are a lot of so to say additional positive effects to this that are not necessarily part of the normal kind of accounting of a tariff. Also in terms of social cohesion and people getting engaged in the energy transition, that these are things that in some form or another should be recognized when the cost for had to compare that with the cost of making this possible through a network tariff. So This, of course, doesn't necessarily make it easier, but there are things that need to be taken into account. And then on the question or the suggestion from Joe to be more strategic, there I would only fully agree. We are, I think, more and more making sure that what we support through Horizon 2020 is really bringing, on the one hand, different models and different parties from Europe together to develop a kind of common view on how the network on the future should look like, really promote exchange between different parties, but also give a clear kind of overall direction of where this is going. And I think if I have to be a bit kind of critical of what we do, at the moment, we're not yet that good in really making that also kind of public. We have it in many discussions and workshops, like the Bridge General Assembly and TSO-DSO workshops, for example. But I think one of the things we're working on now is that when we come up with Horizon Europe, with the first work program, that we also describe at a more kind of translating energy policy into research, making that strategic direction and making sure that then there's then also a consistent set of goals. So I think this is a very good point, and I think we can do better than we are currently doing, but it's definitely something we're working on.
Thank you, Mark. Torash, maybe it's nice to ask, before I ask you to introduce the next topic, also to come in. So what's your feeling on how different regulators are applying these three options? Do you see trends, maybe? You've worked with many different regulators. You still have to unmute, Torash.
Well, thinking a little bit about the next question, sneaking forward, what I see is that I think more important than the actual instrument that is used is, as we say, the devil is in the detail. It's the implementation is the most important thing. And then whatever way we choose, there's some degree of coordination across the EU will also be needed, because of the nature of the next question. I don't think we can have too many different kind of approaches to research and to innovation at the same time in Europe, because we will not achieve sort of all the potential benefits. So the details and the coordination is probably just as important as the particular instrument that we are talking about. These are, in the ideal world, all of them should give a very good result, theoretically.
Yeah. While it is true that we are mixing these three in a very different way today in Europe, and there is many different views on what is the best combination of these different instruments, which brings us to the next topic. So please, Torash, introduce us to the next one.
Well, now we are sort of casting the net a bit wider. So if we say, well, the innovation and research is not limited only to utilities and to the regulator. It belongs to a much wider and bigger picture. And also, again, remembering that R&D is very expensive, and in this capital-intensive industry, the solution is not always to throw money at innovation. We need the ecology and the structure we have around it, and how the different actors, which are many of them, is the equipment manufacturers, is the communities, is the users and the governments, and so on. The ecology and the structure within which these interact with each other is going to be very important. And as we said, R&D, if it's a sort of investment and it generates knowledge, knowledge can also be depreciated like any other asset. So what kind of institutional framework do we like to have around the knowledge that to produce relevant knowledge and to preserve it, so that because of so we don't suffer from the loss of institutional memory. My impression of the R&D and innovation in Europe at the moment is that it is very fragmented, and one hand doesn't know about the other very often. So, in that regard, we could look around outside Europe and learn from the experiences of organizations like APRI or CREPI in Japan, or there could be even other ones. We are not endorsing any particular model, but we are saying that there is probably a need for looking for a sort of pan-European or a super a European super innovation and research hub. One clue could be in looking at some of the very large organizations, one-of-a-kind type of organizations, how they preserve knowledge and for the next generation or so, because at the moment the knowledge lives in the researchers and researchers move around and so on. Not a bad thing. But institutions, if you look, like CERN or ITER and other kind of sort of very large one-of-a-kind kind of organizations, and what do they do when they generate knowledge and how they preserve it within the institution?
Thank you, Touraj, which opens up the last poll. We would like to know from all of you. So Touraj used the word kind of European collaborative super research hub. Do you agree with that? Do we need a kind of European version of some of these institutions we see existing elsewhere? Or do you say, no, we already have it. We have quite a lot. We have this European Energy Research Alliance. We have GRC. We have many more initiatives where we try to coordinate research. Or do you say, no, we really don't need it at all? Very skeptical. So I'm very curious about this one. I think we all are, to see what we think. So will we have the poll? Oh, here we are. So yeah, Touraj, there is a lot of support for the idea you just introduced. Let's see if the panelists are equally excited about this idea. Maybe this time we start with you, Mark, because are you willing to beef up your Bridge initiative into a European collaborative super research hub, or?
Right, well, yes, I think that that we need also there to still go a bit further than where we are at the moment. I'm not sure if we can already set up a UP, as we said, but I think that the way we organize the research innovation in Europe now through Bridge can still also be strengthened if we look at the grids and the investment in networks and research innovation in networks in particular. I mean, maybe a few arguments why I think this is needed. Of course, there is the issue that was mentioned, I think, about the fact that network operators are not really competing with each other. So that could give some scope for cooperation. I think there is another dimension to this, namely the fact that lots of the things that are happening now or that need to happen in Europe, if we want to integrate more renewables, if we want to make the grid ready for the future, so to say, is that these are really systemic innovations. So they don't depend on individual parties that basically make a brilliant discovery and then roll it out everywhere. It really depends on a lot of actors in coordinating and cooperating and working in an integrated way to jointly make this transformation happen. We need the network operators, we need the suppliers, we need the aggregators, the service providers, and we need the technology providers with them. And if we don't align those interests, so to say, and we give also a clear visibility of where we're going, then all of them will be waiting for each other. And I think that is there is obviously a key role for regulators to play, because they have a public function, so they can also lead on some of these things, but it needs to be happening in a coordinated way. And in particular, if we talk about the digital dimension of it, the data sharing, and how do we make that possible, we really need, I think there it's even clearer that we need a coordinated approach to innovation to make this happen. In Horizon 2020, for those who have followed that, we have been, I think if we look back a few years, we've been supporting calls for individual pilots and projects to test if batteries can provide flexibility, how you can make a grid smarter in terms of less time, less blackout time, for example. And all these things were done testing technologies individually. And over the years, we've been moving more and more into knowing that all these individual technologies can work, but how do they all work together? And if we all want them to work together in an efficient way, then we also need to make sure that such a market is easy to enter, that the data are available, etc. And there it doesn't make much sense within a European internal market that each network operator tries to develop that on his own. So getting a common view on what such a market should look like, what the risks are, how you enter into it, and what the data exchange requirements are with it is becoming more and more important. And so we have been scaling up, so to say, the support for research to bring more and more parties together. And in 2020, a call that has just been evaluated, we've asked for one big project, but TSOs and DSOs work together with the market parties to develop and test this market for flexibility in a way that can work in different countries in Europe. But we're coming a bit to the end of that. I think if we would be funding even bigger research projects, we would basically not be talking much research anymore, and we would include everybody in Europe. So that also becomes a bit impossible from the budget point of view. And so we're really looking into new ways of maybe being a bit less prescriptive on the actual digitalization things that we want to support, but creating ecosystems where network operators, market parties, startups, academics, researchers, research institutes can work together and jointly drive the innovation in the grid and see how we can support that. And of course, there are many institutes nationally that do that, but they are national. And there is also a big interest from member states to cooperate on this stuff from the research angle. So what we would like to look at is how can we kind of add a European layer of exchange and cooperation to that. So for me, that links very much to the first suggestion you make here in the poll. And it's something really, I think, worth looking at in a way that it builds on everything that exists. And I think we really need to think hard of what the key features are that can make such a European layer successful. And I think this is also basically a call back to you and to all the people who are listening in to see and share their ideas with us on this, because I think for us that's very interesting to develop further and to continue discussing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So it's also a call to you, dear panelists. If you have good experience with creating these kind of hubs at a national level, can that inspire Mark? So I don't know if you want to come in. I see, yes, Benoit?
Oh, yes, just a few words. I mean, well, this question is not exactly in the scope of regulators' work. But anyway, I think that the word ecosystem that was mentioned by Mark is absolutely crucial. We need to have a combination of various organizations, various tools, and the regulated aspects, the regulated infrastructures are parts of this ecosystem. Now, what we see in the European context, especially looking at distribution, is that we have many different sizes of operators. Another aspect is that beyond the question of what would be the perfect combination of tools, in all cases, the cost of innovation is included in tariffs. So there is somewhere some kind of public funding behind. The question that comes is, what should be part of, let's say, the commercial dimension, where competition fully makes sense, and what relates to research as a public service or public good somewhere. And it would be very useful to see how then to optimize the outputs by organizing some sharing of results and bringing the smaller in this overall organization to have, let's say, the bigger, the ones which can actually deliver large R&D projects or programs, then help the others also be on this boat towards a more efficient energy system.
Thank you, Benoit. Yes, Joe, please.
Thanks. I don't have strong views, I must admit, on the institutional setup itself, but I would just make a couple of comments. One is I do think there is potentially things we could learn from, or things we should learn actually Ofgem, but others as well, from how we set up the network innovation competitions in the UK, because they have given a fairly strong requirement on networks to disseminate the results of their research. And importantly, not just successful research, which might be covered by patents or similar anyway, but also actually unsuccessful research too. So that hopefully gives others in the ecosystem a bit of a head start in terms of, building on work that people have already done. The second comment I'd make, and I think it came up a little bit in the chat, is that I think there is a real onus on all of us to try to open up the innovation structure, and so allow, not just make it about in-house teams in system operators, for instance, but allow other parties to get involved. And particularly, I'm probably going on about this a lot, but particularly if we want data-driven innovation, companies with more of a data background to come in and be able to contribute. We've been trying to do that with our network innovation competitions. That does need some legislative change, so we haven't got as far as we'd like there, but we are really keen to see, for instance, network operators partnering with startups or partnering with firms from other sectors to try to bring a different perspective there.
Thank you, Joe. Sinja, you would like to come in?
Yes, just to add to that, I really agree on that note. In Energinet, we have tried to work with what we call an open door lab, where we do invite technology providers, but also business model developers into our innovation room. We don't give funding, but what we do give is knowledge. We give data. We give an insight into the energy system challenges. And then to create the synergies with their business model development, we hope to somehow create and accelerate some innovation also outside the doors of Energinet. So I'm very much aligned with the view which just brought forward just now.
Okay, thank you. Ricardo.
Well, let me repeat the words by Benoit. It's not really a regulatory task. So I go back to more than 15 years ago when I was a researcher. And I really like this new tool because I see in the question and answers different views. There is someone saying, will the European Research Hub be pushed for efficiency? Could it become I think it was called megalith. Someone also criticized the efficiency, the innovative boost from national hubs. Well, I think that there is a dimension which is important. In Italy, probably we have two main organizations which are under this role, and there is sometimes a bit of competition between them. There is also competition between across countries because you compete for funding. I think that this dimension could be to some extent preserved when reflecting on a single hub. So there should be, if put in place, maybe not some kind of regulation, but there should be a clear push for this super hub to be as transparent as possible, as transparent as possible on the result and on the performance itself of the research. So it's quite like the discussion on the monopoly of networks, something similar, I'd say.
Torash, maybe I can ask you to come in here. Indeed, how do you see it the same, that that's a risk associated with such a super hub, or are you more positive about it?
It is not going to solve all the problems. We shouldn't underestimate the scale of the challenge. It will have a lot of sort of issues involved in it in terms of how it will be running, how it will be influenced, if it's going to be too big maybe for some actors' taste. It's not the answer to every issue that we have, but it is. There is a lot in that space to explore. Maybe there isn't anything like it, and the only example we have is from UK, US, Japan, and probably Korea and some other countries. There hasn't been anything like it, but the most important thing is to look for a new model. And find out if there is one there. I totally agree with everything I heard from the panelists. I must say.
With that, I think we can conclude because we are exactly on time. I mean, exactly. You have been very disciplined. You have been excellent panelists, great participants. Thank you for all the questions. Also great that Ricardo has been the champion, I think, in picking up things in the chat box. Well done. You get the chat box reward, Ricardo. You were better than I was. So really thank you all. And Mark, I think we didn't give you everything, but we helped you a little bit, right, in preparing Horizon Europe. I hope so, and I hope you will make the best out of it. Yeah, please, Mark, if you still want to say something.
Yes, definitely. No, this was a very inspiring session, and I hope we can continue this discussion in some form or another. Also linked to the Copenhagen forum, of course, but no, I think this is a very interesting discussion, and it's very much what we, as I said, in line with some of the things we are thinking about, and it's in the coming months that we need to work this out before we start sharing Horizon Europe work programs with the member states. So as I said, let's continue this discussion, and we're really looking for good ideas and good inputs, and also ways to continue this discussion. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mark. And it's very motivating for Toraj, me, and the whole team to continue to work on this, right? Because we will produce an improved version of the paper, and we will definitely, if there is an interest, happy to continue the debate also.
With pleasure.
That's it for now.